Welcome to another one of SEANC's Meet the Candidate segments. I am Mark Dearmon, your state impact chair, and I'm very excited to welcome our treasurer, Dale Folwell, who is our endorsed candidate for another term as treasurer of the state of North Carolina. Dale is a true hero of SEANC's. He's one of those rare politicians that when he says he's going to do something, he actually does it. And he has done great work in his first term to bring money back from the money managers on Wall Street, as well as tackling the state health plan issues and introducing the clear pricing project. So with us also is Executive Director Ardis Watkins, who will sit down with Dale and ask him a few questions. So Ardis, take it away, please.
So we are obviously overjoyed to be sitting here today talking to Treasurer Dale Folwell, who has been for 4 years the hero of state employees and retirees. But some of you may not know him yet, as hard as that might be to believe for SEANC members. We want you to get to know a little more about Treasurer Folwell, who he is, what he stands for, what he's done for you, and what he plans to do for you in his next term. So Treasurer Folwell, thank you so much for agreeing to sit down with us for a get to know you session.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the support and endorsement of the State Employees Association. It is partnering with you over the last 4 years has meant everything.
Well, it's effortless to support a public servant who has put the public servants first, right there, because you seem to get it, that public servants are critical for the taxpayers to get what they're paying for and get a good job. And so we really appreciate that. But how did you get to this point? What made you somebody who would understand? Just understand the plight of public servants and understand working folks. Can you tell us a bit about your background prior to being treasurer?
Sure. Well, for a third of my life, I was a blue collar worker, like many of your viewers who made my living with my hands and my back and my feet as a motorcycle mechanic and a garbage collector back in Winston-Salem, and ultimately. Making my living with my hands and my back and my feet changed my heart about the need to educate my mind. That's when I started rolling in Winston-Salem State University and UNC Greensboro, where I ultimately got an undergraduate and a master's degree in accounting. My reputation through my entire life and the blood that runs through me is to fix things. That's what I like to do, is I like to fix things. And you know, your viewers don't know me, but I know them. I know their plight. I know exactly what they're dealing with. For example, on some entry-level jobs where they have to work 1 week out of every 4 to pay the family premium on the state health plan. So just because they don't know me or know my name doesn't mean that they're not invisible to me. And what we do every day at the Treasurer's office is we are loyal. And our loyalty is not to big Wall Street, not to big healthcare, and not to big drug companies, but to the people who teach, the people who protect, and the people that otherwise serve.
So you are a Republican, and I think the comment I hear the most often about you out in the field talking to state employees is, he's a Republican? And the reason they say that is simply, you have fought very hard for a few years here for more people to have access to affordable health care, which is not, which is an issue that's sort of been dominated by one party. And you kind of turned that on its head, and you have fought for the state health plan to get affordable rates, knowing, as you stated, that it would drive the cost of health care for everybody in this state down.
Sure.
So tell us about that. People find that interesting sometimes, that a Republican led that charge for health care.
Well, as a former Congressman John Lewis always said, it's okay to get in good trouble every day. And obviously we've gotten into good trouble as we've tried to drive down the cost and drive up the access to health care in North Carolina. Some of your members have seen this in the past, but 2.5 years ago, when I attempted to find out what our state employees are paying for health care, this is the response I got back from UNC Healthcare. Now, by the way, I'm the state treasurer of North Carolina. UNC Healthcare is owned by the taxpayers of North Carolina. So when I sent them a letter trying to get into the weeds of what we're actually supposed to pay, this is what was returned to me. The fact is that this industry deals in secrecy. Their whole business model is secrecy. They don't want anyone to know the cost of the value. So what happens to your members is they get something like this in the mail, an explanation of benefit, and it really doesn't explain the benefit of anything. Facility fee, facility fee, facility fee. Going back to the issue about Republicans and Democrats, it's sad. It seems like the two major parties right now, their whole mission is just to beat the heck out of each other. And we don't attack people at the Treasurer's Office, we attack problems. And the problems are, how do we take advantage of our largeness, either the pension, the defined contribution, or the health plan, to drive efficiencies for the benefit of the members? It's that simple. And the other thing I would tell you about the Democrat and Republican is that people across North Carolina are facing the highest levels of job, food, health, and now educational insecurity, the likes of which we've never seen in our lifetime. And they don't really give a darn what political party a person's a member of. They just want their problems solved. And the problems we're trying to solve, especially in healthcare, is how do we drive down the cost? And we have, for example, for our retirees, every year for 4 years, we have lowered the dental premium. Every year for 4 years, we have lowered the vision premium. We just negotiated an amazing contract on behalf of our Medicare Advantage program. We were required to put that out for bid. 0 premium to the member, $4 premium to the dependent, no cost to the state taxpayers. We're going to take all those savings for our Medicare Advantage product and put it toward our unfunded health care liability, which is something that eventually, if it's not solved, will take money away from things that your members care about: public education, public works, public roads, and public safety.
Right. It would literally mean jobs for state employees. So
Correct.
We thank you for that too. But on the healthcare issue, you had to know going into that you were getting ready to make some very powerful enemies.
Yes. There's another famous philosopher who said it's okay to make the right enemies. But, I get my courage from the support of this organization because all you've ever asked from me, this is going to be shocking to your viewers, is competency and transparency. That's all SEANC has ever asked of me as the state treasurer, is to be competent and be transparent with everything that's going on. And I'm reminded of what former Governor Jim Martin always says, that doing right's rarely wrong. And when you are every day exercising a loyalty to the members, it makes it really, this job is to be simple, to be honest, and to be upward is something that we do every day. And I know that we're in the campaign season, but the fact is you're not the treasurer once every 4 years. You're the treasurer for the whole 4 years. And my wife asked me the other day, why do you need sunglasses? You go to work before the sun comes up, and you leave work after the sun goes down. And that's true for a lot of public servants across North Carolina who are there from dawn to dusk, trying to figure out what's right, get it right, and keep it right.
It's so hard to figure out the things to ask you about and the things to let people know, because literally the list of what you've done for state employees and retirees is so long. But one moment that stood out was during this pandemic. And the employees at the Department of Public Safety were getting very concerned as the virus started to move through the prison system. And DPS was unable at one point to procure tests for their employees if the employees wanted to take a test. And we reached out to your office, because you have the health plan. And was it 2 days, something like that? You had found testing, and after that, the department did initiate some testing. So I think that was one of the more profound moments.
Well, I'm reminded of the movie Jerry Maguire, where Roy Firestone is interviewing Cuba Gooding Jr., and he says, "Don't you make me cry on the show." And it was kind of a laughable moment, but some of your members know that I've had my own intense battle with COVID-19 at the end of March, where people didn't know a lot about this disease. I was in intensive care and hospitalized for 6 days. So in the words of the Jamie Johnson song, I've seen COVID-19 in living color personally. But the fact is, to kind of add to your story, you didn't call me first. You called me after you were, and your members were completely frustrated
Yes.
about the fact
True.
that there seemed to be tests for prisoners, but not for the prison corrections officers and the personnel. And, you know, when Rachel Maddow on her show several months ago, it seems like decades ago, you know, when she said Goldsboro was one of the hot spots of the United States, Goldsboro, one of the COVID hot spots, it was because of what was happening in the prison. You know, as far as I know, the prisoners aren't leaving every day and coming back. It's the employees that are leaving every day and coming back. And I felt like when you called me that part of my responsibility as the head of the state health plan that's supposed to be providing health care to prisoners, part of my responsibility was to see what I could do, whatever it took to get the testing possible. I kept hearing all these reports from these statewide officials about there are not enough tests, So I picked up the phone and acquired some tests. And that got the ball rolling as far as testing for our state employees. And it's a very big deal when you have all these corrections personnel who are going back home every day, some obviously with other members of their family. And it's important that if we have enough tests for prisoners, then we should have enough tests for corrections personnel. And that's why, you know, in almost every case, when I make the thousands of decisions I make on a weekly basis, obviously I use my intuition, I use my heart and my mind, but this really pulled at my heartstrings about the fear and the danger that our corrections officers were in.
Well, you know, it really was a huge moment and a pivotal moment. It changed everything for people who work inside of the prisons. And, you know, shifting gears a little bit, you know, your opponent talks about Medicaid expansion a lot. Mm-hmm. Your opponent talks about Medicaid expansion so much, I'm shocked he's not running for governor. Because what we don't hear as state employees is your opponent talking about the health plan he would administer if he were to be treasurer. What we don't hear him talking about our retirement system in any way other than how he views performance, and we'll talk about that in a second. But what you keep getting asked by your opponent about Medicaid expansion, what can the treasurer do about Medicaid expansion?
Well, the treasurer does not set laws and does not set policy. And I think you've interviewed the state auditor, and she would tell you the same thing. So I'm always confused when this question comes to me as to, does he really understand what job he's applying for? Now, what's interesting about this is that I wasn't born at the top of the ladder. I didn't win the lottery at birth. I'm like most people in this state, grew up in a single family household and struggled mightily economically for the rest of my life. And when you're born at that part of the economic scale, you don't pull the people off their ladders. You know, you build your own. And the ladder that I've tried to build with the state health plan, going back specifically to your question, is that instead of talking about things that the treasurer's office has nothing to do with, why not focus on where my actual constitutional statutory duties are? And they are to those 720,000 people who teach, protect, and otherwise serve. Because really, when you talk about Medicaid expansion, all you're talking about is more access to health care.
Yes.
What we're trying to do with lowering the family premiums for the state health plan, which, by the way, we have frozen for 4 years, in light of rising health care costs, in light of the fact that we're not getting full appropriation for health care, in light of all that, we've still been able to freeze family premiums for 4 years. But just because we freeze the price of something doesn't mean people can still afford it. And if they could afford it, doesn't mean they can afford to get sick or maintain it. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take advantage of our largeness with the plan that we have the responsibility for and drive down family premiums. Guess what happens when you drive down family premiums? You get more younger, healthier people on the plan to offset people my age. It's pretty simple. So this is sort of like yoga. The secret to yoga is to pay attention to your mat and to breathe. And when I get this question over and over again about Medicaid expansion, It just shows a complete lack of understanding about what the keeper of the public purse actually does. And I can sort of understand that lack of understanding because when you're dealing with somebody who's never been in government, never managed money, and never managed people, it's obvious why they would be confused.
Yeah, it's a very complicated world, and the treasurer's position, as we've talked about many times, the treasurer actually has responsibility for and control of more money than the legislature combined times what, 4 or 5?
8.
8
Mm-hmm.
times 8. Oh yeah, because I'm thinking of just the retirement system.
Sure.
So the retirement system,
Mm-hmm.
that's the other thing your opponent talks about. And he says, oh, Treasurer Folwell's investments, the way you've done the investments has not been aggressive enough, and we could have made a lot more money.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is an odd thing for me because the headlines I've been reading, especially since the pandemic started in March, are that North Carolina has weathered this storm better than any other pension plan,
Mm-hmm.
and that those conservative investments you made were right on the money.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like Harlan Boyles, who was treasurer very successfully for years.
Sure.
What do you say to his criticisms about your investments?
Well, once again, it just reminds us that no matter where you are in any particular campaign, there's always opportunities to mislead people. The fact is that we have all types of eyes and ears who focus on the performance of the North Carolina pension system. And just a newspaper report, I'll point one out here, the pension plan's valued at a record $108 billion. And the fact that Moody's, which is the rating agency that looks at us, says that this North Carolina pension plan is, in terms of its ability to withstand an economic shock, they said this last Halloween, before any of us had heard of COVID, said that our pension plan was #1 in the country in terms of its ability to withstand an economic shock. At the end of the day, as interested as your viewers might be about assumed rates of return and life expectancies and all these other things that we could talk about, at the end of the day, we're in the check delivery business. People who teach, people who protect, and people that otherwise serve expect that this benefit that they've earned one day for them to get the checks. But that's not happening across the country. And we just heard major reports last week of major pension plans cutting the actual benefit that people thought they would earn. But we're in the check delivery business, and you've heard me say this before, no one calls the treasurer's office to book a cruise. They call the treasurer's office because they've had a life-changing event. You get a job with the state, you retire from the state. You get married, sometimes get divorced, sometimes lose a spouse. You have children, your children age out of the state health plan. People don't call us to book a cruise. They call us because they've had a life-changing event. And we have remained in the check delivery business. Last month, we sent out over $540 million for one 30-day period in pension checks. So performance is important, but it's no longer just about performance. And I'll say this as slowly and clearly as I can because I have to think about it twice myself. There are less people paying into these pension plans than are not. Mm-hmm. This is a recent phenomenon. There are less people paying into these pension plans than are not. That doesn't mean everybody's retired. So why does that matter to you and your viewers and your members? The reason is that the pension plan only gets its money from 3 sources. The employee, and the employee contributions for the state pension plan have not gone up in 46 years. So the employee contributions aren't going up. The employee contributions from the treasurer's office or DOT or whoever employer they happen to work for have gone up dramatically. This year, the percent of payroll that an employer is paying on behalf of these employees is almost 15% at the state level. So if you make $50,000 a year, which is above the average, but if you make $50,000 a year, then the employer that you work for is putting $7,500 over $7,500 into the pension system on your behalf. And the third thing is investment returns. So that's the only way that this plan can stay one of the most stable in the United States. And when you factor this in, you don't just look at return, you have to look at risk. And risk there is. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't gamble with theoretical investments. You have to look at risk, you have to look at return, but you have to look at the General Assembly, the counties and the cities' ability to continue funding the plan going forward. And the reason that is so simple but not easy for me is that from the first time that I interviewed with State Employees Association, SEANC, I always said that as long as I'm the state treasurer of North Carolina, I'm going to preserve, strengthen, but figure out a way to sustain this plan for not only this, but the next generation of public service workers, and I'm holding true to that.
Well, you've done one other thing in making sure you could preserve that, other than being a prudent, conservative investor. You have, again, made a powerful enemy in some of the investment managers who were taking advantage of these pension plans all over the country. Mm-hmm. And you led the way as a state treasurer in saying, we're not going to have that anymore. If you could explain sort of the 220 rule and things like that, people don't know how these investments work.
Number one is I inherited, and this I'm glad you're sitting down, $11 billion of commitments that the previous treasurer had made before I was sworn into office. $11 billion. That is twice as much as the state debt.
Long-term commitments, too.
Long-term commitments for 10, 12, 15 years. A lot of those commitments had profit arrangements for the money manager of 2 and 20. So some of them did, some of them didn't. But the 2 and 20 that you specifically asked me about means you get 2% of all the money that you manage on behalf of the North Carolina, and you get 20% of the profit.
What's the penalty if I lose your money?
Nothing.
So if you give me $100 million to manage, I get 2% of that in my bank account, and then 20% of anything I make.
That's correct.
How quickly do I have to invest it?
You don't. Well, there are investment periods of typically between 3.5 to 5.5 years, but what they call the investment period. But you're exactly right. You hit on a very important topic in that you get this money even when the money's not invested. But more importantly, if it's profitable, the profits are privatized, and if it loses money, the taxpayers and the members pick it up. Yeah. I mean, we had one investment, a real estate investment, that $175 million was put into it, and it went to zero. I mean, zero. And the other part is that, so we've cut Wall Street fees by over $350 million. That's over 3 times as much as I promised when I was applying for the job to be the state treasurer. I'm using that word applying for the job because everybody's thinking about running for office. What other job do you know of where you know the other applicants? You know, when you apply for the job, you put your best foot forward based on competency and integrity and ability and passion. So when I applied for the job to be the state treasurer, I promised $100 million in fees cuts. We've had $350 million in fee cuts. But more importantly, CEM benchmarking, which is the firm that comes in and looks at our pension plan, says that we are one of the most efficient pension plans in the United States. So it's not just the cutting of the fees, it's the amount of administrative cost that we don't spend. Right. Because anytime we spend these administrative costs, it comes off the backs of those that teach, those that protect, and those that otherwise serve.
So I think in a nutshell, state employees have somebody who's been steady, appropriately conservative with their money and the taxpayers' money, but who's been willing to be incredibly aggressive. A lot of people talk tough in politics, but you backed it up. You actually took on the most powerful industries in this country, and you did it for SEANC members and other state employees and retirees. That's huge. So, I mean, I don't know of a time that's happened before.
Well, let me tell you why. I'll sort of describe it as chalk and cheese. Now, nobody likes the taste of chalk. You know, my wife says a meal without cheese is like a hug without a squeeze. You know, everybody likes cheese, right?
Yeah.
But you know what you do with chalk? You write zeros. Lots of zeros. And you know what else you do with chalk? You write commas. So now we're talking about not thousands, but millions, hundreds of millions, now hundreds of billions of dollars that we manage at the Treasurer's Office. And you know what else you do with chalk? You solve problems. You map it out, you write it on a board, you try to figure out how to figure out what's right, get it right, and keep it right. The second reason is, and this is a tribute to my routines and my wife and our family and my friends back in Winston-Salem, where we reside. Number one is that all the public servants who are watching this, it's not just them, it's their spouses that are also public servants. I mean, the corrections officer who was coming home at night, and I mean, what do you think their family members were thinking about? Are they bringing home COVID-19, for example? So it's not just the public servant, it's the spouses. But the thing that's always driven me is that if I'm going to spend time, if I'm going to choose to spend time away from things that I love and not do a great job at it, what does that really say about those things that I'm spending time away from? That means I'm giving them full respect. So the reason that I don't need sunglasses is out of respect and a tribute, especially to my wife, because it would say something about our relationship if I came down here and didn't want to be world class and the best state treasurer in North Carolina history.
And we do, Cynthia Folwell, if you happen to see this, thank you for sharing your husband with the state for the last 4 years and hopefully for many, many more years to come. I want to say to SEANC members, Folwell first is what we've been telling you. When you get to your ballot, vote for treasurer first and then fill everything else out. Folwell first. That's everything I had to say. What else would you like our members to know?
Well, not only am I honored by your endorsement, but we've also received a lot of other endorsements across North Carolina. The Troopers Association, the Police Benevolent Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, the Professional Firefighters and Paramedics Association, dozens and dozens of sheriffs across North Carolina. So the people that the community trusts to teach, protect, and otherwise serve, they trust me to be the keeper of the public purse. But I'm very honored recently to have received the endorsement of the News and Observer, the Charlotte Observer, the Daily Record, and Dun. That's hard to say.
Yeah.
And there are many other newspaper endorsements to come. The fact is that when you look at the ballot, it's P, president, then you have the federal races, and then governor. At the very end, T for treasurer in the alphabet. Yeah. I'm the last name on the statewide ballot for council of state. In the last election, thanks to your support and support of your members and their friends and family, going back to vote Folwell first, at the end of the night, I received 10,000 more votes than the President of the United States in the last election and 68,000 more votes than the governor. And my point of saying that to you is with all the things that are splitting our communities right now, whether it's race or politics or gender, there's one thing that the Quaker blood that runs through me is that every day we get joy in the opportunity to come to work to be fair and just. There's no black and white, male and female, Democrat and Republican money at the Treasurer's Office. It's all green. And whether it's from the custodian to the chief, we don't pick and choose which laws to apply or who to apply them to. And our loyalty remains with those that teach, those that protect, and those that otherwise serve.
All right. Folwell first, y'all. That's imperative on your ballot. Folwell first. Back to you, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Treasurer Folwell and Ardis, for a great interchange. As you can see, there's no doubt why EMPAC-endorsed Treasurer Folwell for another term. It's incredibly important that he be elected. In fact, we're asking you to vote for Dale Folwell first when you do your ballot. And we encourage all of our members to vote. Vote for our endorsed candidates, and to get your family and friends to vote for our endorsed candidates too, so that we can have a great legislature and a great council of state when we get into 2021. So for more information about voting and about EMPAC's endorsed candidates, go to scenicvotes.org. Hope to see you at the polls.